Hello everyone, I am Sword Caliburn 687, and today I would talk about Sonic X Shadow Generations. If you guys really want to support this video, smash that like button and subscribe. And without further ado, let's begin the video. White space is a really interesting dimension in the Sonic universe, and I would want it to be explored more. A YouTuber named Chari5 made a video about white space, and Chari's video has made me be inspired to do this video. White space has a lot of mysteries going on within the Sonic universe, and there's a lot of things we don't know about white space. Sonic Team originally created White Space just to remake all previous levels for Sonic's anniversary, which is cool. In the original Sonic Generations, fans picked a fan poll on what previous stages that they wanted in Sonic Generations, which is awesome. Sega wanted Sonic Generations to have a simple story that is not deeper and complex, like the complexity and interesting storytelling of the adventure games and the Dark Age games. The plot of Sonic Generations is that classic Sonic and modern Sonic needs to work together in order to defeat the Time Eater. Both Sonics have to work together in order for the timeline to be restored and undo the effects of the Time Eater. The Sonic characters that was controlling the Time Eater, it was none other than modern Eggman and classic Eggman. Dr. Eggman wants to undo all past events with the Time Eater so that he can beat Sonic and erase Sonic and his friends out of the timeline. To make sure that this plan is successful, modern Eggman gets classic Eggman so that they can work together. After defeating the Time Eater, both Sonics returns time to normal, and Classic Sonic and Classic Tails returns to their time. And that is pretty much the plot of Generations. This raises a bunch of questions. How does white space work in the Sonic universe? There is a lot of theories on how white space works in the Sonic universe, and these theories are really interesting. First, let's talk about the Time Eater's inspiration, which is Father Time. Father Time is the guardian of time and the embodiment of time itself. Father Time has been reinterpreted in media, like in Danny Phantom and Regular Show. In Sonic Generations case, even though Sega took a lot of inspirations from Father Time, Sega did their own thing with the Time Eater. White space in Sonic Generations is where all time and spaces converge into one dimension, and that's how it works. Rouge's dialogue in Shadow Gens confirms this, all because she says we're in a hub between a time periods. This is why you see locations that don't exist anymore in the Sonic universe, like Crisis City. Even though Sonic and Elise restarted the Sonic timeline, all of the events would be in white space. It doesn't matter that Sonic 06 doesn't exist anymore, it would all be in white space. What does this mean? Does this mean that white space can even have things like alternate timelines? What if I told you yes? When you fight against Metal Sonic from Sonic Generations, you do fight him in the bad future. There is a lot of debates in the Sonic community if the bad ending is canon or not from Sonic CD. I can say that both endings from Sonic CD would be considered canon within White Space, and White Space can even have bad events too. Sega did announce that everything in the Sonic universe is canon. Even though it might be a joke, I don't think it is a stretch. Like, for example, all of the alternate routes within Shadow the Hedgehog, and a lot of Sonic fans are trying to figure out which route is canon. Sega could easily explain that all of the scenarios within Shadow the Hedgehog could be all considered canon in White Space, and if Sega explores it, it would be awesome. Sega never confirmed or denied that all of the alternate routes within Shadow the Hedgehog are canon or not, but if Sega explores it, it could be really interesting. Azuka did say in an interview that he wants to make Shadow a villain, and because of this statement, a lot of Sonic fans didn't like it. Interesting idea that I came up with. What if Shadow sees an alternate counterpart of himself, but evil? It could be based on one of the alternate routes within Shadow the Hedgehog, if Black Doom decides to team up with Shadow, and it would be really awesome. It could be like Sonic Prime, but with Shadow. These alternate routes can show what Shadow could potentially become if he didn't have Maria or any of his friends in his life. I do disagree on what Azuka said, making Shadow a villain again, but if it was Shadow from an alternate timeline, that would be really interesting. Even though I would want this, I don't think that Sega would do this, all because some fans would be confused on the Sonic timeline. Sonic isn't Zelda, and having alternate timelines would confuse people, so Sega would never do this. In Shadow Generation, Shadow has his own white space, separate from Sonic's. Charai5 did and made a video talking about how Shadow's white space isn't intended for him, but more intended for Sonic. I didn't think that Charai5's theory is true, but the more I think about it, it starts to make sense. All of the Act 1s within Shadow Gens are based on Sonic's versions of the levels, but Act 2 are based on Shadow's. Why would White Space have Sonic's versions of the levels when you play through Shadow Generations? This is where Charai5's theory comes in, and it fills in the gaps within Shadow Generations. Charai5's theory saying that Shadow's white space is not intended for Shadow, but more intended for Sonic makes a lot of sense. Without Shadow using his Doom powers, Shadow can't make it in the level within white space, and what Chari says is mostly true. Notice most of the levels and all the bosses within Shadow Gens are something that Eggman doesn't even want within Sonic's white space. Rail Canyon was a reveal that Eggman wasn't the main villain in Sonic Heroes, but it was Metal Sonic. Metal Sonic disguised himself as Eggman so that he can conquer the world, and he was ruining Eggman's plans. It seems like Eggman or the Time Eater's throwing all the things he doesn't want with Sonic's white space into Shadow's white space. Eggman doesn't know that Sonic 06 doesn't exist anymore. Why would it be within Shadow's white space? Charai5's theory explains this. This is probably the effect of the Time Eater. The Time Eater's probably picking the best scenarios for Eggman Man on what stages would it be in Generations. Most of the levels in Shadow Gens are areas where Eggman has to work together with Sonic and friends, which he doesn't like. The only few times that Eggman would work together with Sonic if there was a villain that was stronger than Sonic and Eggman's robotic army. It does seem like White Space combines all the thoughts and feelings of Eggman and Sonic towards these locations. Even though Chare 5's theory is mostly solid, I would add my own theory upon his theory. I think that Shadow's white space is an amalgamation between his white space and Sonic and Eggman's. Why does Shadow have his own white space? Shouldn't he be within Sonic's white space? And there's a lot of unknown answers why Shadow has his own white space. I think that Chari 5 forgot to add one specific thing on why Shadow got his own white space, and it all starts with this. The Chaos Emerald, I think, is the reason why Shadow got his own white space, and it protected him from the Time Eater. In a classic Sonic, the special stages are created by distortions, created by the Chaos Emeralds. The Chaos Emerald, it can distort time and space, and it has been shown time and time again in the Sonic universe. The best example of this is Sonic Prime. Shadow has used Chaos Control before the Paradox Prison destroyed his reality, and by doing so, it made him immune from the effects of the prison. I think that the Yellow Emerald protected Shadow from the Time Eater, and because of that, Shadow got his own white space. Shadow's white space feeling like an amalgamation between Sonic and Eggman's, it makes a lot of sense. The prime example of this is Sunset Heights. Sonic felt betrayed by Shadow, and he wanted to get answers from Shadow on why he betrayed the Resistance. Of course, this wasn't the real Shadow, but a fake created by Infinite. Sunset Heights is where a lot of the game events of Forces happened, Sonic losing to Eggman, and Eggman taking over the world. I would disagree with Chari that Shadow has a harder time going into white space without his Doom powers. I think that Sega's original intentions of Shadow having a harder time going into white space without his Doom powers are caused by Black Doom. Black Doom has some controls over Shadow's white space, and it does make sense. Black Doom wants Shadow to be angry by giving him Doom powers so that he can take over his body. The obstacles that are preventing you from going into the levels are caused by Black Doom, and it makes a lot of sense. This further proves that Shadow's white space feels like a hodgepodge between him and Sonic, and why the connection. I think that the answer is obvious. All because Shadow is perceived as Sonic's rival. Anybody that is perceived as Sonic's rival is supposed to prevent Sonic from getting further into white space. This Shadow Generations cutscenes prove this. Anybody that challenges Sonic would get teleported into a boss stage. I can see that Sonic's white space is the primary white space, while Shadow's is the secondary. I don't think that it is a stretch, all because what Tails says in Sonic Adventure 2. Tails says in Sonic Adventure 2 that the Chaos Emeralds attract each other like magnets, no matter what location. This is probably why Sonic has found Shadow, and sensed the presence that Shadow has a Chaos Emerald. What makes this extremely crazy, if Shadow was in his own white space, Sonic would have found him anyway. The Emeralds would have told Sonic where Shadow's at, and if Shadow wasn't in Sonic's white space, Sonic would have shown up in Shadow's white space. I think that Sonic's white space being the primary white space would make a lot of sense, and it is based on how Sonic and Eggman would perceive people. I think that a deeper connection that somebody would have between Sonic and Eggman is the higher possibility of them having their own white space. Sega released an official chart of every friend's relationship between Sonic and Eggman, which is cool. Can somebody like Tails can have their own white space, or even Knuckles? Eggman did work together with Knuckles in Sonic Free and Knuckles, and Tails has stopped Eggman's plans from time to time. These two characters are really close to Sonic, and really good friends with Sonic. The one problem with Knuckles and Tails getting their own white space is how Eggman views their characters at the time of Generations. Eggman views Tails in Generations as a nuisance and nothing more than Sonic's sidekick. Eggman's dialogue with Tails from Frontiers confirms this, and with Knuckles is nothing more than a pawn for Eggman to manipulate. Even though these two characters have the potential to get their own white space, but it is up for Sega if they want to give any more of Sonic's friends a white space of their own. If Sonic's white space is the primary white space, what about Gerald and Maria Robotnik? It was hinted and implied that Maria saw Sonic within Shadow's white space. How is that possible? Sega might have cut the scene where Sonic met Maria within Shadow's white space, and that's probably the answer. How did Maria, Black Doom, and Gerald Robotnik showed up in Shadow's white space? All of Sonic's friends, enemies, and all locations are trapped within white space. All of Sonic's friends are in white space because of the Time Eater, but there's another way to get in white space. I think another way how a person can get into white space, if a person that has their own white space thinks about another character subconsciously or unsubconsciously, that character could be in that person's white space. The prime example of this is Maria and Gerald Robotnik, and it makes a lot of sense. What Shadow wanted was to save Maria and Gerald Robotnik before the Raid of Space Colony arc happened, and these are the versions of Gerald and Maria Robotnik in Shadow Gens. These versions of Gerald and Maria Robotnik makes a lot of sense because in Dark Beginnings, Black Doom was trying to destroy Shadow mentally. Maybe the other reason why Gerald and Maria are in white space because of Black Doom. Black Doom can summon the Black Arms and the Gun Robot in white space, so he might control white space too. Black Doom is not in a boss gate in Generations, and why he isn't in a gate. Notice that all the bosses in the boss gates in Generations are opponents that Sonic and Shadow defeated or killed. Besides the other free Eggman boss fights in Generations, the whole reason why I think that the boss gates are created is to prevent Sonic from getting further into white space. White space is the representation of all life being extracted out of a person, place, or thing, and they're put into this weird dimension. Sonic does need to get keys to get further into white space by fighting against the bosses. I think that all the boss fights in Generations are trapped in the boss gates by Dr. Eggman and against the Time Eater. It does seem like all of these enemies are removed in time, all because they represent Eggman's failures. These villains mess with Eggman's plans, or if Eggman works together with these villains, they would betray him. This would even make sense with Mephiles. Even though Eggman doesn't know about Mephiles, the Time Eater does. Mephiles does have more boss keys than the other bosses, all because it is a threat to the Time Eater. Mephiles and Iblis are parts of a time deity, which is Solaris. If Solaris was ever whole again, it could mess with Eggman's plans. It does seem like the more keys that a boss has in generations, the stronger the threat is. Mephiles has 4 boss keys. I can't imagine how many boss keys that end would have, or even infinite. This makes me wonder, why isn't Black Doom in a boss gate? Black Doom warps you into the Doom Zone, which are altered versions of the Sonic levels. Even though the Doom Zones reuses assets from Radical Highway, I think that Black Doom is almost as the same power level as the Time Eater. I think that Black Doom's portals or the Doom Zones makes him immune to the Time Eater, and it makes a lot of sense. Maybe if a character is stronger or almost the same power as the Time Eater, they can't be trapped in a boss gate. Both Black Doom and Eggman is damaging the timeline for their own benefits, which is insane. This makes me wonder if Black Doom is strong enough to escape Shadow's white space, and that is a big mystery. All of the Sonic characters are saying what Eggman is doing is wrong, and it's having a negative effect on the world. What Eggman says in the original Sonic Generation script, he says that the Time Eater can erase time and space, but the line is slightly different in the remaster. Tails says if Eggman alters time too much, it would damage the Sonic timeline. What do I think about both explanations of the Time Eater? I think that they're both true. If Eggman is altering history, why doesn't Sonic not exist anymore? Sonic still exists within white space, so there must be a reason why Sonic has an existence. I think that there is an easy explanation. It's how time works in the Sonic universe. My guess is when the Time Eater's altering history, it takes a while to take effect. The best comparison to this answer is Back to the Future 2. In Back to the Future 2, Biff changed the course of history, and by doing so, Biff created an alternate timeline when he ruled over Marty's town. Even though Biff changed the course of history when he ruled over Marty's town, it would take a while for the alternate timeline to take effect. In the movie, both timelines were trying to merge together, and Marty was trying to bring his timeline back to normal. If Eggman is trying to rewrite history, everything goes into white space. Because Sonic is repairing the timeline, Sonic is undoing any negative effect on space-time. Even though we don't see characters like a Jet, a Razor Jin, and Infinite in white space, they're in their own pocket dimension within white space. White space has a lot of mysteries we don't know about, and I hope that it gets explored in a Generation sequel or a DLC 2 Generations. A character that can easily explore the different parts of the Sonic timeline, it could be Silver. It was explained in one of Silver's bios that he can go back in time by using time portals. One one of the biggest mysteries for Sonic Generations for Silver. Silver thought that Sonic is a fake Sonic, and he doesn't want to give Sonic the Chaos Emerald. Since Silver has a gray Chaos Emerald, does that mean he's in his own white space? And I don't know. If there were a Silver Gens, maybe Silver can explore the erase timeline of Sonic 06. If Silver Generations explores how white space works, it would be a good idea. A cool thing about Silver's bio, it says that he can only go back in time with the time portals if the timeline is messed with. I think what is going on within white space, it seems like time and space doesn't want Eggman to damage the Sonic timeline. What Eggman says at the end of Sonic Generations, he says that white space doesn't have any time, which is weird. I find this kinda odd, but other Sonic characters say that time exists within white space. In the Generations rewrite, Tails says it is the time dimension, and none of it doesn't make any sense. What I think that both characters saying about white space, it is probably both true. Maybe because all of time is converted into white space, it tries to escape the dimension. If time is truly sentient in the Sonic universe, it would make a lot of sense. The Time Eater is the biggest time anomaly in the Sonic universe. The Time Eater, it's not supposed to exist, but it clearly does. The Time Eater is the biggest threat in the Sonic timeline. When it's time, do something to stop the Time Eater. When Sonic and Shadow clears white space, it reveals more levels for Sonic and Shadow. I still do think Charai 5 is right, that the levels do have to be significant for the characters for showing up in white space. I think that there are limitations on what the Time Eater can do when altering the Sonic timeline. This is probably why the Time Eater can't annihilate Sonic when he's an infant, and if there's more limitations to the Time Eater, it would make a lot of sense. Time being sentient only allows Eggman and the Time Eater to pick specific stages that is connected to Sonic, but why Sonic? Why would time itself would allow Sonic and Shadow to save white space? I think the answer is very simple. Sonic always saves the world from Eggman's tyranny, and time aiding Sonic does add up. And the very simple answer why time would aid Shadow. Remember Shadow's motivation after Sonic Adventure 2. Shadow's own goals after SA2 was to protect the world so that he can live up to Maria's wishes, so that people would be happy. Maybe if a character has a deeper desire to protect the world, time would allow them to have their own white space. Gerald Robotnik says that time is trying to heal itself, and it does need an equilibrium for it to heal itself. And that equilibrium is Sonic. Sonic is the glue/catalyst for all of space-time repairing itself, which is crazy. I think the reason why Sonic's white space is the primary white space, all because time has chosen Sonic to repair itself. Remember how Shadow Generations ends. Shadow's white space disappears along with Maria and Gerald, and what happens after that? Shadow meets up with Sonic for defeating the Time Eater. It is almost as if time itself would want Shadow to meet up with Sonic so that Sonic can defeat the Time Eater. time itself needs Sonic and the Chaos Emeralds to repair itself, and my theory makes a lot of sense. Sonic does need to repair all the clock gears so that he can go into the boss gate with the Time Eater. The clock ants, the clock gears, and generations could symbolize time itself, and the clock always appears when the Time Eater goes back in time. Think about how Sonic Generations ends. After the Time Eater was defeated, all of time is returned to normal, and classic Sonic returns to his time. This purple time portal isn't from the Time Eater, but this time portal sends classic Sonic and classic Tails back in their own time. And thinking about this, I think that this is the time portal in Silver's bio. This hint indicates that time is truly sentient in the Sonic universe, and I would want it to be explored in a sequel to Generations. This would be a good point to end the video. Thank you for watching this video. Like, share, subscribe, but also leave a comment below if you guys really want to see more of my content. Anyway, see you guys soon.